going to be checking out a few encounter sites, and I'm going to go and try and film some of it, and I'm hoping to get Rocky Elmore down in that area. You might remember him. He was the retired Border Patrol agent who had a couple encounters and talked about some of the other encounters some of the Border Patrol agents had. So I'm hoping to get my camera down there, maybe go up to Otay Mountain, check out the area, and hopefully I can get all that on video. I'll be posting that to the member content on the website, so look for that next week. Sunday should be a very interesting show. You know, I got a call from a father just a couple days ago, and they were up camping, and his 15-year-old son, along with his friend, had seen a Sasquatch. They were down by the lake, and just kind of messing around by the lake. The son had turned around, and about 30 feet away, he described seeing this huge ape, larger and taller than LeBron James. And he goes into a great description of what he saw. The son's so upset about it, he's not coming on the show, but his father has agreed to come on the show and kind of share what his son saw, what his son told him while they were out camping. And his father actually ran back to the area trying to get a look at this thing. Should be a very interesting show. I'm also looking at getting a tribal police member on the show who went out and investigated some Sasquatch reports and is still looking into Sasquatch reports today, talking to witnesses. So it should be a very, very fascinating show. So look for that on Sunday. Let's get to it tonight. My first guest tonight is Craig. And Craig, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Sure thing, man.
Where did your encounter take place?
Southeast Michigan, Lenawee County. It was about 10 years ago.
And do you want to tell us what you were doing and then just kind of walk us into the encounter?
I was out deer hunting in this newer spot I got. I'd hunted there a few times and hadn't had much luck seeing a few deer, but was out sitting out there and I was watching a few deer at about, 150 to 200 yards, and a loud knocking started fairly close to the deer, which at first it could have been bucks fighting. That's kind of what my first guess was. And then, after listening to it for a few seconds, I realized, man, it didn't sound like bucks fighting. And then it got closer, and it wasn't bucks fighting. It was definitely a knocking sound. And it was a calm day. Leaves around the ground, and there was no rustling. I mean, it kept coming closer. It knocked up to, 75 yards or so, and then it broke a branch that, put me on a full state of alert. I mean, it was loud, and I'd never heard that sound before or since, a log basically snapping like that. So it had my attention, and it came all the way within 40 yards knocking. I don't know, every 5 to 10 seconds, a knock or two loud, very loud knock, and it got all the way to me. I never heard any footfalls, but I heard the knocking. I mean, it would be at, say probably 60 yards. It knocked a few times, came closer, and I never heard it come closer. I just heard the knocks coming closer. And it got behind, it came all the way to, basically, I was going to see it. Its next step, I was going to see it. It's behind the last thicket, and basically 40 yards of open field between me and it's behind one last little thicket, and it's knocked a few times, real loud, aggravated. No other sound yet, but knocking, and then I heard after a couple knocks, in a bit of a standoff, which I did not see it, but it was not knocked about 7 to 10 times when it was within 50 yards of me, basically at its last step before I seen it. And then I heard basically real low, like a squirrel taking off or something. I heard a and it got back in the woods and let out a scream, growl, yell is what I call it. It started high pitched, went down to almost a low roar, and ended with some syllables. Really strange. And that was my cue to get out of there. I was fight or flight, and I flew. And I'm thinking that this is 10 years ago. The Bigfoot wasn't really all over the place like it is now. I had no idea what it was, at the time. It was just something huge, mad at me. That's all I knew. So when I let out that yell, man, I didn't know if it was calling its buddies. I knew I didn't want to run and provoke an attack. You're not supposed to have those spots out deer hunting, man. I was just overwhelmed, and I jumped out of my tree stand after that yell, hightailed it to my truck, and I walked briskly without running. Got in my truck, used two hands, put the keys in the ignition because I was shaking so bad, and got out of there and never went back.
And what would you liken the vocalizations to? I mean, how would you compare it? Or, I know you did a impression of it, which I thought was pretty good when we were on the phone earlier. But what would you liken the vocals to? Or do you mind doing the impression for the audience?
Well, started with a high pitch and with a growl in the middle, and ended with a few like a terrible, but similar. Not ridiculously loud or anything, but I was close to it, so it didn't have to be loud, I'm guessing.
What was the impression you got from the vocals?
I just got it. I jumped out of my tree right after that. I mean, it wasn't way up in the air. It was probably 12-foot tree stand with an older stand that wasn't mine. I didn't put it there. I was just using it. And when I heard that vocal, that was when I jumped and walked briskly. It gave me the feeling that I needed to leave, or it was about to get ugly. And actually, I thought it was about to get ugly. I thought that's what that call was. Something crazy was about to happen. But it didn't. That was the end of it.
Yeah, and the knocking you described, that's interesting, like a baseball bat against a tree.
Yeah, very loud. And, it probably knocked, 50 to 75 times, man. It went on for about 5 minutes. So at first it was just, I couldn't understand it. But then I realized this thing's mad. It's huge. It wants me out here. I don't know what it is, but I'll be gone shortly.
Yeah.
It really freaked me out. And it was 3 miles from my house. So I hear it around my house now. I mean, I never did up until this last 10 years. I went without hearing, nothing. But this last year, I really was hearing some strange things around my house.
What kind of vocals are you hearing around your house?
A lot of yells. Just not screams, but yells. And there was the last corn that was up around me was about an eighth of a mile down the road from me. And last October, I was hearing yells out. There was 3 of them. There was like a yell on one side of the corn, and in the front, and then in the back, like all in succession. Really kind of freaked me out there. And it's not like I'm out listening to them either. I just go out, between my house and the car is all I ever hear them. And I've heard a few things. The dogs were just going nuts one day. That was the first thing I noticed last October. The first thing I heard. Dogs just going crazy. There must have been 25 dogs going nuts. And a donkey was going nuts. Everything was just going crazy. And it was about 11 o'clock at night across the road. I heard a yell 3 times. And every dog stopped barking, and the donkey went silent. I've never experienced anything like that. So, it was just a single-syllable yell, 3 single-syllable yells. But, similar, not loud. Sounded like it did it towards me, away from me, and in a different direction. And then all the dogs just went silent. It was crazy.
Do you still go out and hunt?
I don't hunt there, but I hunt.
Yeah. It's definitely a cool encounter. I think you're right. I think the description and the behavior you're giving, it was time to go, and it sounds like you were between it and the food.
Yeah, well, I was right. It was right near some deer where the knocking started. 2 small ones and a big one. I'm assuming that I interrupted his hunt. That's the only thing I can come up with, and he was mad. That seems to make the most sense to me. Whether that's what happened or not, I don't know. It came out of some very thick. It was right at the edge of some pines that are. You can't see 5 feet in there. So I'm assuming that's his hangout. I don't know. I haven't been back there, and I won't go back.
Yeah, and I don't blame you.
It's only 3 miles from my house, so I don't have to go back. It's right down the road. I don't go by it, but I really believe they're around my house at times. I've heard some really strange. With the coyotes, something. My wife actually heard it. Something yelled at 2 o'clock in the morning, got the coyotes going. We were outside in the barn, and she ran out the door looking for the kids yelling. She thought, she heard a person yelling. And, well, there wasn't nobody out there yelling with the coyotes.
Yeah, that's crazy, especially 2 in the morning.
Yeah, it's a hot area for some reason. It's the Irish Hills area. So, and there's a lot of swamps and lakes, but the hills they're not big hills. They're more like mounds. You go up in, for a squatch, it would be 3 steps, and it's over this hill and out of sight. That's maybe why they like the area. I don't know. It's rural, no doubt. But the hills, I think, is a big attraction for them. And the deer.
It sounds like you definitely have them in the area, especially with the encounter that you had and then the stuff that you're hearing. Is it mainly only certain times a year is when you're hearing them, or was it just at one time in October?
Yeah, really, the whole month of October last year. And I'd never heard anything before that. Or really, a few questionable things possibly, but nothing like last October. Because, like I said, I had the last corn around. It was a humongous cornfield. And I'm assuming the deer were in there, and at night they were in there. I heard some really strange things. And like I said, not like I was out listening to it either. It was just, go out and smoke a cigarette outside or go outside of the car or something. Nothing, I was never out spending any time really listening for them. I still heard them. I think they're pretty prevalent in this area at certain times.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. Well, Craig, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you sharing your encounter.
Sure thing. Appreciate it, Les.
My next guest is Eric. Thank you for being here tonight. I really appreciate coming on and sharing your encounters.
Thanks for having me, buddy. I appreciate being on the show.
Now, you had an interesting encounter back in 2001. It was kind of your first encounter, and I know you've had a major sighting after that, but I want to talk about the first encounter. Where did it take place?
It was in Ohio, northern part of Ohio, really the far tip. It was up in Ashtabula, coming home from Ashtabula from a seminar back in '01.
And so you're coming home from a work event. Just kind of walk us into it. Explain to us what happened. If you would, tell the audience what you saw and just kind of describe what you saw.
Sure. Like I said, we were coming back. There's three of us. We were coming back from a seminar. We were on a back road. It was late. It was late at night, and I was sitting in the back seat behind the passenger, and I had my head up against the window, and I was just kind of veering out, looking out past the front of the car and the ditch line, and this thing came into view in the headlights, and as we started getting closer to it, it started like taking shape. I thought it was a big shrub, big bush at first, but the closer we got to it, like I said, it started taking shape, like human shape. And then when we really got on top of it, about 30 yards out from us, you could see it. I mean, it just, the high beams on the car just illuminated it. And I realized, my gosh, what we're looking at. And I saw the whole left side of it. It was squatted down in the ditch line. I saw the left hip, left arm, left shoulder, chest was sticking out past the arm. He was looking dead at us. He had everything that I saw just a few weeks back. He had the very predominant bone structure, facial features, very masculine, really thick, reddish brown hair. I saw the side view, which was really, looking back, was a great view of him because I could see the head, in the shape of his head. And believe it or not, what people describe as the head really, contouring back and going really high and up to a point, here, that's not what I saw. Now, West Coast, somewhere else maybe, but here it wasn't really like that. It did go back, but it was more egged. It was more of an egg-shaped head, where the narrow part of the head or the egg would be the top part of the head. Very short forehead, like not real high, not a real high forehead. The nose was extremely wide on it. The eyes were round. I did see the eye. Now I didn't see color of the eyes, but I saw the eyes itself, the definition of the eyes, and they were round. They were more round than ours. The body structure was just massive. I mean, just a massive creature. And when you see something like this back then, your mind really goes through a meltdown process. It really does. Because you're taught at such a young age, to recognize things. You're taught, that's a tree, that's a car, that's a dog, that's, so on, so on, so on. So when you see something like this, your brain really goes into a different function, and it really does. It goes through this meltdown, and it's trying to compute what you're really looking at. It's just really odd what your mind goes through when you're seeing something you've never seen before in your life, and you're trying to make sense of it. And then when we drove past it, I was literally face to face with it as we drove by. I mean, it was as the car was driving by it was panning to the right, and I'm passing it, so I'm panning to the right, so there for a split second, I mean, we were literally 6 feet away from one another, as I passed it in the ditch line. And one of the great things about Ohio, though, is we don't have a big bear. We don't have elk. We don't have moose. We don't have any of your large game animals here in Ohio. So you can rule out so much, which I really didn't even have to rule anything out. I know it was there. You know what I mean? It was there. I saw it, and there's nothing else really to say other than it was a Sasquatch.
What was going through your mind at the time when you saw it? Were you thinking Sasquatch, or were you thinking what that?
No. I really was not. As we were coming up to it, once I realized what I was looking at, though, I was still going through that process of, is it this? Is it this? Is it this? Sasquatch didn't even enter my mind until we actually finally drove completely past it. And then it was like a light switch, and I was like, my God, I just saw a Bigfoot. And that was actually my reaction with this sighting that I had just weeks ago. It just, bam, there it is. It hits you like a ton of bricks. My gosh.
Before we jump into that next sighting, what did the guys in the car say? Were you the only one that saw it, or I know there was, 3 other guys with you?
There was 2 other guys. The guy in the passenger seat up front was asleep, passed out. And then the driver, when we drove past it, I turned and looked out the back window, and it went completely dark. And when I spun back around, the driver was literally turned around, as we're driving, he was turned around rubberneck, looking out the back window. He pans over to me, and all he did was he shook his head, and he goes, I don't know. And he turned around, and that was it. That nothing was said on the way home. I never spoke. The first person I spoke to about it was my dad. And that was like weeks later, and my parents were very open-minded, being 2 of the biggest hippies to come out of the 60s. They were pretty open-minded about a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
So, but it made it easier, to think, why not, to not rule out or not dismiss something so quick, but to actually sit back and say, well, why not? Why can't this exist? Why can't that happen? They were very open-minded with certain things, and my dad really kind of ran me through the gambit a little bit, of in, like, what was the night like? Was there fog? Was there this? Was there that? And just certain things. And then, at the end, he just kind of, well, you say you saw what you saw, I believe you, and you're just going to have to handle it the best way you can the rest of your life, and that's kind of what I did. I just kind of tucked it away, and that was that,
When did you get into actually researching this and talking to witnesses and doing all the things that are entailed in this subject?
Me and my research partner, Mike Kane, we had worked together for a long time, and he was the one that I really, really came out and told my story to outside of my dad, and it was actually years before I even told him, but we were working the same job together and driving back and forth together, and just started talking like you do throughout the course of jobs and stuff, and started finding out that we believed in the same things and, felt the same way about certain things. And I finally came out and I told him, about what I saw, and it really sparked from there. And then we started talking about, man, we really need to get out. Mine was more of a validation of what I saw. I needed validation, along with already knowing that they exist, but you still want that validation.
Right.
You still want that. And, so that's what really sparked it, for he and I to get out and start researching. The investigation part actually was very recently. When you and I had spoken, that was the first time that Michael and I had actually went out on an investigation, to somebody that's had an encounter. Up to this point, we'd never really investigated somebody having an encounter. We were just so buried in our own research. We had been asked a couple times, hey, would you like to come out here and check this out? I've had this happen, but we were just so intense and so buried in what we were doing in our research that we just kind of really didn't journey into that side of it, until now.
Let's fast forward to the last 3 weeks. Tell us about the encounter that you recently had, and what were you guys out doing? And then if you would, just walk us into the encounter and give us as much detail as you remember.
Sure. We were out. It was Saturday, the 22nd of August. We were out in our research area. We usually camp out. This is in Salt Fork here in Ohio, and we usually camp out at the primitive campsite. But my wife and my ex-girlfriend were with us, so we had their RV. We were in the RV park, so the whole day was kind of different. One of the girls took us over and dropped us off in our area, and we went in and was researching and was getting activity. Actually had rocks being tossed at us, had a couple little whoops, going on, and really nothing out of the norm for what we're used to. That stuff happens a lot to us, when we get really close to the area within our research spot. And so we went in, we recorded our, did our data and stuff like that through our research, and we had came out, dropped down off the ridge and came out and hit the road, and we told his girlfriend to meet us up at this bridge. So we were walking down this road, and we get up to this bridge and we start shedding our gear, and we're just hanging out, just talking. And it was a little channel. The bridge was over top of like a channel, waterway. And Mike's sitting on the guardrail, and I'm looking at him, and I'm talking, and I turn to the right, and as I'm panning to the right across the channel, there he is. I mean, plain as day. We averaged it at roughly 100 yards out, and I had actually seen him as he was ducked, not like ducked all the way down, but he was bent over coming back up. He was dipping underneath a branch that was sticking out of a tree. And as he was, dipped down and was coming back, I saw him dip down. That's when I really locked onto him. But when he was coming back up, he looked at me, and we were locked eye to eye. And when he made contact with me, he came straight up. I mean, he stretched his back. He stretched straight up. His head went straight back. His eyes went wide. He paused for a second, like, okay. And then he turned to his right, which would have been my left. He turned to his right. He took a step and dropped down off the side of the little bank and was gone. And I'd actually, at that point, I immediately took off running down the road. When he disappeared, I just jetted down the road. I was trying to get another vantage point to see him again, and but he was gone. But yeah, for every bit of 6-7 seconds, I mean, we were there. We were locked onto each other.
What did the creature look like?
He was very, very muscular, very fit, no facial hair. He did have hair on the side of his cheek, that came down off his head and down, like covered his ears. I didn't see his ears at all. No facial hair on him. Underneath his chin, he had facial hair, but none directly on the face. No hair on his chest at all. Dark colored, a dark Native American, or like a Middle Eastern color to him. His skin was, and I say leathered, that's the only way I can really describe it. His skin looked leathered, as in very tight, really tight skin. Very, very, very strong facial features. His cheekbone structures were just, his jaw structure. I mean, everything about his face was just bam. I mean, it was just, there. His chest, very, very large, very, very wide. He come down in a V shape. There was no straight to him. I saw from his waist up is what I saw. Now, and I'll back up for a second. When I took off down the road, when I cut in to the marshland that he was in, the weeds were at my chest, and I'm 6'1". And when I stepped into the weeds, into the marsh, they were up to my chest, and I saw from his waist up is what I saw. And I did see a side view when he turned to his right. I mean, I saw a side view of him as well. The head, same as what I saw, those years ago. More of an egg shaped, but not real elongated. The eyebrows were not, the bone structure above his eyes didn't protrude out past his eyes. They weren't like cavemanic or anything like that. They were a regular, bone structure that we would have. But his cheekbones were very very big, very large cheekbone structures and jaw structure. His nose was very wide. His mouth was really wide, thin-lipped. But there was really no gap. I didn't see any major gap in between, like the tip of his nose and his chin. I didn't see an upper, like, clevis gap above his lip or below his lip where his chin was. It was like nose, mouth, chin, and very squared. He was very squared-faced. And then the body, I mean, just the size of his body was really remarkable. It really was. I didn't see his hand. I don't recall seeing his hand. It didn't come up out of the brush. He did move his arm. I did see him like kind of swing his arm as he turned, but I didn't see his hand come up like out of the brush. And then he took the step and dropped down, and that was it. He was gone.
It's interesting that you mentioned the V shape. In my own encounter, that's what I remember I remember the shoulders where, I know that's kind of a weird thing to remember more than anything else, but how wide the shoulders were. But that V shape definitely sticks with you when you see it. Did you notice any facial expressions?
Yeah, and that's one thing that I told Michael, after we walked back up to the bridge. I said, dude, that was, to me, that was a sign of, I want to say intelligence, because it was recognition. It was, oh, you're there, like, oh, okay. His eyes went back, his eyebrows went up, he kind of like, oh, okay. But he didn't jump. He didn't sudden move or jerk or anything. He was all nonchalant about it. It wasn't anything major. He just kind of stretched. His head went back like, oh, okay. There you are. I'm going this way. And that was his demeanor. He didn't seem to be like, oh God, I got to go now, or run or anything. He just, okay, I'm going this way.
Yeah, and that's interesting too about your encounter. I've talked to a lot of people who have come face to face with these things, and there's this look of shock. Their eyes get real big. They kind of put their head back when you have these encounters. But you're right. I don't think I've ever really heard an encounter where someone has come face to face with them or has been within 100 yards or less, and the creature freaked out and took off running. most of the time, I mean, I'm sure there has been a few accounts, but most of the time the creatures just seem to kind of nonchalantly walk off with caution. That's interesting about your description. What color was the creature?
He was reddish brown, or actually, I should say he was brownish red. He had more of a brown with a red tint to him, is what he had. But like I said, the skin was dark colored, but his hair was a brownish red. But it was pure sunlight that day. There was not a cloud in sight. The skin, I mean, the sunlight was just glaring off his skin, and that's actually why I say leather, because the skin was just so tight, and the sun was just like beaming off of his skin. And I think that's one of the main reasons why I was able to get so much detail on his face and his chest, you know, in his traps. I mean, I saw his traps, you know, I saw his pecs, you know, it just glared. His skin just glared off the sun.
As you're looking at this creature, did it resemble more of a human, or did it resemble more of like a known primate, non-human primate?
If you was to take a human face, a man face, and a primate, and you was to mold them together, if you was to take a Native American face, very predominant Native American face, and an ape face, and mold them together, that's really the only way I can describe what I saw. It was both. It was man and ape together.
So you see this thing. It obviously it's probably twice your height, or almost twice your height. Its build is, you know, I don't know how big you are, Eric, but I'm assuming it probably has twice or three times your build.
Mm-hmm.
It's an unknown creature. Did it worry you at all going after it?
No, not at all. I didn't have anything like that come across me, you know, but I think it was more because of his demeanor. You know, I think it would have been, I know it would have been different if he would have, when he stretched up, if he would have made like an aggressive, you know, towards us or anything like that. Yeah, it would have changed the way I acted, you know, but it wasn't. It was just, he was so nonchalant about it, you know, and I was like, I got to get closer. I got to get closer. You know, it did not for, I don't know if it was more because my adrenaline was pumping so bad. I don't know, but that didn't enter my mind one time.
Tell me about some of the encounters that you started investigating.
This one here that we actually were investigating, I had received a call from a guy out in western Ohio, and he said that he's getting a lot of activity in this area, and he was very new. This is actually his first time really going out into the field, you know, and starting to research. And this area that he goes to, it's private property, very secluded. And he and another person went into the woods, started getting movements behind them. They got so many yards into the woods and then started hearing movement behind them. And I asked him, I said, well, deer movement, just regular animal? And he said, no, these were steps. These were like bipedal 2-step. He said his buddy took a step and snapped a twig, and when he snapped the twig, it stopped. The movement stopped behind them. So they hung out for a couple seconds and moved on, you know, started pushing in farther and came up to a dry creek bed, and he had found 2 sets of prints or impressions in the dry creek bed, but they were more paw-shaped. They weren't your footprint of a human or a Sasquatch print. They were more paw-shaped up front, very, very big paw-shaped, and then the foot narrowed down from the paw, narrowed down into like a, you know, very narrow foot into the heel. The heel was about 2 to 3, not even 3 inches. He said not even 3 inches wide, and went into the back part of the hill. It went into a V, like a V shape, and very deep into the ground.
I've tracked something like that before. I can tell you it's not good news coming, but go ahead.
But yeah, well, he said that they were, looking at these impressions, and they were in a little low-lying valley. This creek bed, there's a hill to the right, hill to the left, and the top part of the hill to the right, he started getting what sounded like chatter. He said he looked up, and he was kind of panning across the top of the hillside, and he had caught something move. Now, I asked him what he thought it was, and he said he wasn't sure. He said it was about 8 feet off. It looked to be about 8 feet off the ground, but it looked like a head. But it happened so quick, he said, I really can't say what it was. He said, but I do know it was large. Whatever the object was very big. But then they started getting breaks, tree snaps from both sides of them, on both the hills, to the left and to the right, and started getting even more chatter from both sides. And this is when they just got freaked out, and they exited. Excuse me. They came back the following day, early evening, had come back to that location. And he told me if he would have been 3-4 minutes sooner, he would have seen what he believes was something large, grayish shape, dragging a deer into the woods. When they got to the area, when he and his friend saw it, it was stepping into the woods, disappearing into the woods. He did catch the backside of it and the color of it, but he could tell it was dragging a deer. He does know it was dragging a deer. And then he said this thing gave a scream that he could not. The only way he told me, which I found odd, but he said the only way he could describe the sound was if you could literally put in your head what an elephant would sound like being totally dismembered, just being shredded apart, the scream of an elephant being just torn apart. He said that's the only way I can describe it. And yeah, I was like, wow, okay. All right.
Did he ever say what he thought it was?
No. I asked him, I said, what do you think it was? And he said it'd be complete speculation. He said, I cannot tell you what I saw. He said it would be speculation. He said I can't say. So he wasn't going to. But he knows it was very large, it was grayish shape or grayish color, and it was dragging a deer. He did see the deer.
What's interesting about the footprints he's talking about, being very narrow in the heel, almost like a V shape, and being very wide up front, like a paw print. What I would do is go back and Google what a baboon track looks like, and show it to him and ask him if it was something like that. I'd be kind of curious to see what he says.
Oh, so would I. I would, yeah, actually I will do that. I'll send it to him and ask him. The prints that he took a picture of, but his phone was dying at the time. And phones, if you try to take a picture, they're horrible. The pixelation is just shot. So they didn't really turn out very well. What we found when we went out to that area, my partner and I, this whole area is locked down. You cannot access this area anywhere. We drove for miles looking for an alternate route to get back into this creek bed, and there isn't one. It's all private property. It's all locked down. You cannot get into it. What I found was strange is we went down the dead-end road where he normally parks, and there was an old man out, and he was tending to his beehives. And I got out of the truck and walked over to the fence and introduced myself to him, and I asked him about the creek bed, and I asked him if there was any other way in there, and he said no. And I said, well, is this land over here by the water? I said, is this private land? He said, yes, it is. I said, well, we're trying to get back into this creek. I said, I heard it gets really gnarly back in there with ridge lines and stuff, and it gets pretty thick. And he said, yeah. And he put his head down, and he kind of shook his head a little bit. He goes, there's a lot of weird things that's happened back in there. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. He said, a few years back, a man was killed. He said a hunter was killed. I said, oh, really? I said, accidental shooting? He just shook his head. He said, no. He said, there's just a lot of strange things that happen back there. And that's as far as he went with it. And I said, okay. I said, thank you for your time. And, we got in and actually drove out of the area, and that's when we really started trying to find an alternate route. And we don't trespass. We get permission if it is private land. But ended up coming back to that same area. Well, down the road from him, when you first turn on that dead-end road, there's a school bus that sits in the corner lot, and there's an old hermit that lives in that school bus. And he happened to be out at the time. And we stopped, and I was talking to him. We were talking to him, and I asked him, the same question, is there any way to get back in there? And he said no, and he reiterated, without even asking him, he reiterated what the other guy said. He said no. He said, there's a lot of weird stuff that happens back in there. He said, you ain't going to get back in there. I said, really? He said, no. He said, the game warden come in and bought all that property. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said he owns it all. I said, well, what about, the watershed? I said, he can't own watershed up to water. He said, no, he bought it all. He said, you can fish off that bridge. He said, you can float down that creek. He said, but if you step off that boat into that water, you're on his land. He said he come in and bought it all up, and he doesn't let anybody back in there. Huh. Okay. So that's kind of where that ended.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That especially the game warden buying it. I didn't know you could buy the watershed lands either. I know in Washington State you can't.
Yeah. Well, I thought the same law was here. That so many feet up to a water's edge, is owned by the state. But no, he came in and bought it all. But that kind of just threw us out of that area, and we ended up over at a state park near that area. And we'd hiked in off trail like we always do, and started finding impressions and prints. And some of them were footprint, Sasquatch print, and some of them were paw printed, with the very, very, very narrow, V-shaped heel to them. It was odd. The sounds that Michael had actually heard them twice before I had heard them. Very low, almost like a very low bark, or how a dog wouldn't actually bark, but they kind of just they'd give that little rough sound to them, not an actual bark.
Yeah, kind of under their breath.
Under their breath, yeah. It happened. Mike heard it twice, and then the third time, I'd heard it. Now I haven't went back. I had my audio on the whole time, and I haven't went back to see. And I did document what time it was when I heard it, but I haven't went back yet to see if I'd actually caught it on the audio. But it was very low, very, very deep under the breath, Whoa. But that was it for that area. I mean, other than finding some prints, that was really it.
Yeah, that's interesting. As you got a good look at these creatures, I mean, you got a really good look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know every guy that researches this, every guy that looks into this, has their own theories on what they think these are. What is your theory?
I honestly believe that it is. I honestly believe that a Sasquatch is part human. There's our DNA is in them, that we do, somewhere on that tree, somewhere in the bloodline, we were molded together. I honestly firmly believe that. Now looking and seeing it face to face like I did, and seeing the human characteristic as well as animal characteristics, I honestly believe that they hold human DNA in them. I really do.
Do you mainly say that because of the face, looking into the face of the thing?
Just the body. I mean, just everything. The body of it. I mean, everything. The way that it moved. The way that it showed recognition of me. I mean, it's. There's really no other way to put it. It's part human.
Let me ask you, and I don't know if you've taken reports outside of your area, but one of the things I came across was, depending on what location you're in the United States, is a description you'll get. What people will describe what they see. And some of the other descriptions, and I don't know how much you listen to the show or not, Eric, some people say they will look very human-like, and then sometimes down south, people will say it looked very chimp-like, very chimp-like in the face. It still has a recognition, like any primate would, of knowing, being surprised or having different facial expressions. But
sure.
Down south, they'll say, hey, it looked more chimp-like. And what's interesting is, up north, they'll say it looks more ape-like. But all people describe that hooded nose that you describe. A lot of people describe some of the same facial features. Have you thought about the different descriptions as you're researching this, and do you have a take on that?
I do. I've thought about it a lot. Obviously, not every Sasquatch is going to look the same. No more than every human doesn't look the same. We're all different. They're all different. Here, what I saw, it had more human look to it than a primate. It had more human looks to it. It was more human looking than Patty. I will say that. It had more human features to it than what Patty did or does. It has more human features to it than, the skunk ape, down south. So I would say here, at least here in Ohio, what I saw was more human-like in that aspect of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm sure you know of Mike Woolley's account.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the images, the artist's recreation of what Mike saw that day, it looks like if you took a Native American face and put it like on an ape's body, that's kind of what it looks like. I don't know if you've seen the recreation or not, but it looks very much like a Native American's face on an animal's body.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly how. I mean, not minutes after I saw it, and Mike was drilling me, with questions, just trying to keep it fresh is what he was trying to do. But that was the first thing that I said. One of the first things I said. I said it was you take Native American face and you take an ape and you put them together, and that's what you have. But you can see that Native American in it. You really can. You could see the Native American, that look anyways, in it, in its face. I definitely saw it.
Yeah, kind of. And when you say Native American, so keep the natives happy so they aren't offended. The features, the strong features features you're talking about.
Yeah. Very, very strong facial features.
Well, Eric, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and sharing your encounter. I mean, it's something to where, I know most people wish for an encounter like that, like what you had.
Yeah.
Where it's not aggressive. They get a good look at it, and it gets up and it walks off. I know a lot of people definitely dream of having an encounter like that.
It was amazing. It truly was, but it was so much. I literally, and Mike has a video of me. I mean, he turned on his GoPro like just seconds after I stopped running when I was trying to get a vantage point of it. He had actually was able to get his GoPro turned on, and you have me in the raw. I mean, there's a few F-bombs dropped, and but it's raw, it's uncensored, it's in the now, but it was just so much. It was all those years ago, what I saw, and then seeing what I saw, a few weeks back, it just all came together. And to be honest with you, Wes, my body was going to be one way or another. Either my body was going to just let the adrenaline take over and handle it that way, or I could have literally dropped to my knees and just cried like a baby. I really could have. It was just so much. It just for that 6 or 7 seconds of seeing him, it was just so much just came down all at one time, and that validation of not only what I saw years ago, but then seeing him, but then also what Mike and I have been doing for the last 2.5 years of really pushing the envelope and being out there every single week, researching, and it all came down on me all at once. And I, the side that you see, obviously the adrenaline took over and I was just pumped, but I could have very easily just dropped to my knees and just cried. I really could have, and even the whole week after that, I was not myself. I was, you just start, your mind just is processing and processing and processing, and it really throws you out there in left field for a little while. It truly does, but coming out of it and knowing what I know and knowing what I saw and knowing what Mike and I do, and it was just, very, very gratifying, truly gratifying.
Yeah, well, and that's understandable with the emotions and the adrenaline running and everything else. Is definitely understandable. Mm-hmm. But Eric, thank you again for sharing the encounter. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Wes. Thank you.
And that's it for tonight, everyone. I will see everyone back here on Sunday. Until next time, have a great night. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you this evening. I have 2 guests coming up. My second guest this evening is Chris, and Chris used to be a special agent for the tribal police. He's since retired, but he'll be sharing with us a lot of encounter stories around the reservation, some encounter stories that he was called out to while he was with the force. So it should be a very fascinating night. My first guest is Ron, and his son, he was out camping. They had a family camping trip out at the Mount Baker area, and this just happened a few weeks ago. And his son and his friend had run into Sasquatch, and he talks about what his son saw, talks about how his son's feeling. Very fascinating. I think his son's dead on with his description. It should be a great night tonight. Before we get to that, though, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, email me. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, check out the website, sasquatchchronicles.com. There's a daily blog, additional shows, there's forums. It's a cool place to go to share stories. It's a cool place to go to share information. So I really hope if you get a chance, you check it out. Well, let's get to it tonight. I want to welcome Ron to the show. Ron, I apologize to you. I put on the blog it was Mount Adams and it was Mount Baker, so I apologize for that. But thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing your son's encounter.
Yeah, no problem. Glad to be here.
Let's start from the very beginning. What were you guys out doing? And then if you kind of would walk us into, with regard to your son and his friend, and then kind of what they told you, just kind of walk us through the whole story, if you would. Kind of what were you doing and then what was experienced?
Sure. Well, we started out our camping trip. It was August 13th of this year, and we had spent a day swimming at the north end of Baker Lake, kind of near, we had camped at Shannon Creek Campground on the northern end, and it's just below Baker Forest Road 11, I believe it's called. And we spent the day swimming to the north of the campground, and noticed a lot of dead fish floating around that day, and it kind of caught my attention. I was thinking I should probably let the kids know that, you know, there could be a potential for wildlife. Unfortunately, I didn't, but it was in the back of my mind. We can save that part for later, so keep that in the back of your mind. We finished the day swimming and decided to head back and cook some dinner up. And I got stuck with kitchen duty, and the boys and my wife and daughter, they headed down to the southern side of the Shannon Creek campground. And there's a little kind of an alcove. I guess it's more like an inlet, surrounded by the forest and the mountains. And the boys, the ladies were swimming on the lake there, on one side, and the boys walked around this. It's kind of a horseshoe-shaped alcove, and they were kind of dinking around. It's and when I say hike, it's really difficult. It's heavy log jams. You have to go in the water about half the time to get over there. It's not an easy hike. You can't go quickly. You could break an ankle. So they clambered over there, and they were kind of dinking around on the other side of the bank, and I showed up, and I could see them over there. You know, I want to say 200 yards, maybe less. No, it's probably about 100 yards. I couldn't tell you. It could be less than that. I could see them really well, though, and they had found a little arrow, and they were kind of showing me the arrow, and, you know, we were shouting back and forth. I couldn't really hear them. They couldn't really hear me, but they were showing me this arrow. And my son's friend, he sat down on a log, and he was trying to make, you know, kids make a bow. They wanted to make a bow for this arrow they found. And he's over there trying to bend this piece of wood, and my son is standing there, and on this kind of half-submerged log that's parallel to the bank, and he turned around and he looked up, and he was just looking up into the wooded area. It's kind of a steep area going up toward Mount Shuckson, heading north. And he was looking at this creature. He wasn't even sure what he was seeing. He describes it as a very large creature. He said the head was about the size of a watermelon. He describes it as a watermelon size, and very thick, wide-shouldered creature just staring at him with these amber-colored eyes. He kind of described it like they were kind of glowing kind of off the lake. Now, keep in mind, it's about 6:30 at night, and we're on the shady side of this mountain. So it does kind of make some sense that the light coming off the lake would shine up into the mountain hillside there and could catch an eye shine. Yeah. And that's what he described it. So he's standing there and kind of turning into shock. He said his heart sank and he felt like he was going to pass out because, you know, we in our household, we've always discussed the Bigfoot, you know, the Sasquatch. It's always been in our minds, and when we go hiking, camping, he's never considered that. You know, he kind of believes it, but it's kind of if you don't see it, you know, it's kind of a myth. Well, he realized what he was actually seeing was not a bear, it was not a raccoon. It was, in his mind, a Sasquatch. His friend noticed that he stopped talking and was just staring up into the woods, and he turned around, the friend turned around and saw less of the head, but more of the body, because he was at a sitting location, and he describes a creature that was, the way they described it was, "Hey, Dad, do you know LeBron James? He's really big, he's got wide shoulders." Well, this thing was bigger than that. And it was covered in dark hair. Like he said, I could see the arm, I could see the muscles, I could see the pectoral area of the chest. He said it was very muscular and very wide. So they immediately bolted out of there and got back as quick as they can and ran over to me. Like I said, it takes about 5 minutes to get from one side to the other. And so when I took a very brief, I listened very briefly to what they said, and I said, I'm going over there. I got to validate what you've seen, and maybe it's a bear. And I ran over there and being clambered over logs and got all wet and as quick as I could. I got to the area and they kind of pinpointed. Let me back up a second. They started following me. I begged them, please take me over there. And they got about halfway and said, we're not going over there. We do not want to go back over there. So I said, fine, I'll just go solo. And they became very worried that I was going over there solo. And now that I look back at it, it probably wasn't a good idea. But I had to validate what they were seeing at that right time with the lighting. I wanted to see if it was maybe a stump or some moss or maybe even a bear. I have run across bear up there. So I got over there and I got in the area like right below where they had seen this creature, and I just listened, and it was about 10 minutes. I just stood there and looked and listened, and I couldn't hear anything. I didn't see anything. I was not about to climb up into the area where they saw it, because little did I know that when we returned the next day, how close it was about 30 feet. And that's very, very close as far as I'm concerned for any wild animal.
Yeah, it's almost too close.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, how old is your son?
He is 15 now. He was about 3 weeks from his birthday, turning 15 at that time.
And what was his reaction when he came back to the camp to tell you what they saw? What was actually both of the boys' reactions?
They were very concerned. My son was a little more distraught than the other boy. I think maybe because he saw the face. He kind of looked white. He didn't look well. He was very shocked. He just wanted to go back to the campsite.
Were the boys asking to leave at that point?
They did. My son actually said, I would like to just go home if we can. He's like, I don't want to sleep here tonight. I said, we're here. We have protection. He's like, well, I'm not sleeping in the tent alone. There's no way can you sleep with us or can we sleep in your tent? I agreed to sleep in their tent, and unfortunately we had a very, very bad thunderstorm that night, so that did not help.
What did your son say the face looked like? How did he describe it to you?
Yeah, he described it. It was difficult for him. He said it was almost like a gorilla. Just a real dark face, kind of a flattish nose. Because you got to remember, when they're telling me these things, when we got back to the campsite, we're kind of going over everything, and I'm taking all the notes I can. I'm like, okay, is it possible you saw a bear? Is it possible you saw... I'm naming off all the animals, and they're like, Dad, no, we've seen bears. The friend has hunted bear in Alaska. He knows his wild animals. He's an avid hunter. He wears, he's a typical hunter kid. It's like he was absolutely convinced there's no way it was a bear. Yeah. So kind of yep. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, the head. Kind of a whitish. He described it as watermelon shape. If you were to kind of stand like a watermelon on its end, if it was, vertical. But he said it was like a big, big head.
And how's your son dealing with this today?
He's been really quiet lately. He hasn't wanted to talk about it since the incident, but up until last week, I haven't brought it up to him, and he's the one who started talking about it again. And we were just the other day, I think I told you a couple of days ago, he said, I'm so convinced that what I've seen is a Sasquatch. There's no other way it was anything else. He had spent a lot of time looking at pictures on the internet of different animals that he could have mistaken, and he's drawn to a couple pictures that we discovered on the internet. One was a picture. It looks like a gorilla, kind of behind a tree, with the like amber colored eye shine, and he insists that's what he saw. Was that creature?
Yeah, it's one of those things, like I was telling you, you know, when you have a sighting, everyone wishes for a sighting. Everyone wants to see these things. They want to see these things. But it's funny because when you see one, there's this period of time where you wish you wouldn't have seen it. You wish you could go back and unsee it. And you wish that it was just kind of, there's a difference between believing they exist and then seeing one. And your son's reaction really is the reaction a lot of people have after they see these things.
Yeah, I think you nailed that. Both of them have told me they wish they had never seen it. You know, like I said, we've discussed it and he said, you know, we've always talked about Bigfoot. In fact, you know, we every time we go camping, it's kind of the tradition to say, okay, we're going to go look for Sasquatch. You know, we're going to go on, which is kind of a ploy to get him to go for a hike. You know,
right?
And he said, now that I've seen it, I kind of believed it at first, but now I wish I never would have seen it, Dad. I just wish it never would have happened.
It kind of changes your worldview on a lot of things, especially when you go up in the woods again. And I'm sure he'll get back out in the woods, but you definitely have your head on a swivel. You're more on high alert when you go out there because you realize there's more than just cougars. You realize there's more than just bears out there. You realize there's more than your normal predators out there. Now you have this other thing. And 30 feet away, that's close.
It was kind of alarming to me when I did convince him the next morning to take me over there so that we could get some GPS locations and kind of check out the area. And I was more comfortable climbing up in there in the morning time. It was about 9:30 in the morning. We went back over there. They got into their locations and I climbed up in there. And laughably, I wasn't even close to the size. Yeah, it was really dang close. I can tell you that.
Did your son say the creature? Did the creature vocalize? Did the creature do anything with regard to what your son said?
He didn't describe any vocalizations or facial movements. We discussed that last night. He said no, it just was just staring at us like really curious. And yeah, so nothing like that. They did say that. The friend said that as they walked, because my son left like seconds ahead of him as he was in a standing position, the friend said as he turned around, he said the creature was turning back away from them to go back up the mountain as they left, which would make sense because when I went over there, I didn't see anything. So.
Yeah, I think as you and I talked the other day, I think probably what happened, and this is one of those encounters that you would want in the sense that a lot of times, you know, I've had a lot of people on the show and a lot of people share different encounters. And generally when they have an encounter like your son's and his friend, when the creatures make some sort of aggressive movement or they growl or they vocalize, generally if you stay in the area, you're going to have problems that night. You're going to have some serious problems that night because that's a cue to leave. A lot of times with encounters like this where it's coming up and it's just watching the boys and when they leave, it exits. Generally, you don't have any major problems with them. I think, and I'm just theorizing at this point because I don't, again, as you and I always jokingly say, I don't have one in my garage I'm studying. But I think probably what happened in this situation is it was coming down to the water, and with the fish down there, that's a great food source. It's coming down to the water, and generally they'll come down off the ridge lines at night. Usually people catch them around the time your son had his encounter, or really a lot of hunters will catch him early in the morning going back up the mountain. And I think they come down off those ridge lines to eat, to hunt at dark, and then as the sun's starting to come back up, generally they make their way back up. And probably what happened in this situation, and again, I'm just theorizing, it was making its way down to the water, and your son and his friend were caught in the middle.
Yeah, I think you nailed that right on the head. It was just alarming to me that all the dead fish, the fishermen had spent the day or the week, whatever, fishing and catching the bottom feeders, and they were throwing them out, so they were floating up on the banks. Had to keep my dog away from them, all day long. So it does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and like I said, I know how your son feels. I went through the same thing. I mean, I know exactly how he is feeling, and the offer's always open to him. If he wants, he doesn't have to come on the air. I'm not going to ask him to come on the air if he doesn't want to come on the air. But if he just wants to call me and talk to me about, how he's feeling about the whole thing, I'd be more than happy to talk with him. And it helps really to talk about it. It's even though you don't want to, I'm sure your son doesn't really want to talk about it. It really does help to kind of talk about it, talk about what he saw, talk about how he feels with someone who has seen it. You know what I mean? So people don't beat him up over what he's seen.
Yeah. I'm glad you bring that up because yesterday he mentioned, I haven't been able to talk to anyone because, how do you start that conversation? Hey, by the way, I saw Bigfoot. He's like, I don't know who to talk to. In fact, the friend who has told his parents, there's no such thing as Bigfoot. You didn't see anything up there. That poor guy, he didn't have any support there. He's getting ridiculed. So,
yeah, and that's the hard part.
Yeah, it makes it tough.
It is, and it's a very emotional thing. A lot of people have that very strong emotional response to having an encounter. And when you tell someone and then they beat you up over it, it kind of crushes you, really.
Yeah.
Especially when you're trying to, you're telling the truth on what you saw, you're telling the truth on how you're feeling. And then you get they don't exist. Well, it's like I always say, it's be careful what you wish for, and it's all fun and games until you see one, and then it's a whole different outlook, it's a whole different feeling, it's a whole different experience that you go through after you've seen one of these things, and they really do strike the fear into people. I think it's funny. I was talking to a guy last Friday. And he was saying that he was shocked by the fear factor. He was shocked by the experience of seeing one. He was shocked by, just hit him like a ton of bricks when he saw one. And he's always wanted to see one. And then he saw one, and then he wished he would have never seen it at that point because it just terrified him. And I think with your son's description really is dead on with what people describe here in Washington State. I mean, it's to the T what people describe. And then looking at your son's behavior, the other boy's behavior of not wanting to go back and wanting to leave at that point, people generally don't have that same type of fear when they see a bear or when they see a cougar or when they see your normal, quote unquote, normal wildlife. They don't have that strong reaction, but they do when they see these things. They want out of there. They want to leave. They don't really want to talk about it, So my heart goes out to your son and his friend, and the offer is open to his friend too. I mean, you have my cell phone number. His friend's welcome to call me if they just want to talk about it. Yeah,
it's very, very kind of you to offer that.
And I know you were hoping to see it running back over there.
Actually, I got to be honest with you. After I saw their initial reaction, I was kind of hoping I wouldn't, because they were very scared. I really didn't want to see it at that point. It's like you said, you do want to see one. Oh, it'd be so great to see one. And then you see it, and then, I don't want to see this anymore. And that's where I was after I saw their reaction is, I'm okay if I don't see it.
Yeah. Yeah, and in that part of the country where you're at, it's kind of one of those areas to where it's not great for footprints. It's really hard to track animals in that area just because of the way the brush is. I know there's a lot of moss in the area. There's a lot of clover in the area.
Yeah.
And the rock and the ground underneath is hard as a rock in a lot of those areas. So even without all of that underbrush, it's nearly impossible to track anything.
Yeah. As you can imagine, I've played out a bunch of scenarios in my head, like what could this have been? And one of the scenarios I played out was, well, could this be a human dressed up in a gorilla costume, right? So when I got up into that area, I quickly changed my opinion of that to how the heck could they have gotten in there? Because it's so thick and so steep. And at that exact time, how would they know that anyone would be over in this area? It eliminated all of the possibility of human interaction.
Yeah, and most gorilla costumes, I don't know that there's a lot of people that do that here in Washington State, because I think you're apt to get shot pretty quick, especially being in a gorilla costume.
Yeah.
So a lot of people generally don't do that. And I think your son,
Right.
you know, kids nowadays, my son's 13, and I'm blown away by, I used to be the technology guy, and he just puts me to shame with it. But kids are pretty smart these days. I think your son would have picked up if it was someone in a gorilla costume.
Yeah.
And a bear, you know, if a bear's going to get that close, there's going to be either an altercation. Bears generally, especially in that area, will run from you the moment that they catch any sense of you. They're not going to stand there and watch and stare. And
Yeah.
And I really think your son saw a Sasquatch. I really do. And there's that's really one of those areas too. I know I said Mount Adams, and I know it was Mount Baker, but there's a lot of reports in those areas. A lot.
Pretty frightening. Yeah, he told me a few days ago, he's like, you know, I would take a lie detector test. He's like, I'm so convinced of what I've seen. Like, there's no way it was a bear. I'm not making this up. You know, they both told me the same thing. So I have to support him, you know?
Yeah, I would just support him. And there's no need for a lie detector test. I mean, I went through that.
Yeah,
I offered to take one after my encounter. My brother offered to take one after his. Both me and my brother offered to take one. There's really no need for your son. I really think that he saw one, especially with his reaction. The best thing I would try to do is get him back out in the woods as soon as you can and just go for a hike. Have him get, time helps. Time really does help. And it may take a couple of months, but I would just try and get them back out there. And these things are out there. You know, people go out in the woods all the time. These things are out there. And most people believe they don't exist until they actually see one. And then it's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming on and retelling your son's encounter. It's a great encounter. And like I said, his description is dead on. The good news, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, here in Washington State, you generally don't get a lot of aggressive type attacks, aggressive type behaviors. The ape-like type that we have here in Washington State, generally speaking, they will come in, there's curiosity, and then they'll leave, and there's usually not an altercation. If this was Texas or Oklahoma or Louisiana or Missouri, I would say, well, it's probably best not to go back into that area.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
But I can't thank you enough for coming on.
Hey, sure, no problem.
Well, next on the show, I want to welcome Chris. He was a special agent for the tribal police. And welcome to the show, Chris. Thanks for being here tonight.
Good. Thanks for having me.
Before we actually get into some of the stories, before we get into some of the different things you were called out to, and even some of the things that you're researching now, your interest with Sasquatch started when you were young. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, my grandfather, he was a logger, worked for the Forest Service and the VA out in Northern California, Southern Oregon area. I remember him talking to me before he passed on quite a few years back about a story that when he came back from the regular shift, they came back the next morning, their bulldozer was beat the heck out of. The windows were smashed, the engine compartment was totally torn apart, and looked like big old dents inside of all the way around it. The ground was pretty solid, so they just thought it was a boot print, but it was pretty big boot prints. But it tried to pull the tracks off the bulldozer. So when he told me that story, he knew, as they call it, the big man up there. Here in South Dakota, as a kid, they call it Hishma, in our native language, Lakota language, as, hairy man. So when they tell you the Hishma man's going to get you, that's pretty much, when you get that's the curfew of the community.
Did your grandfather ever say what he thought did did all the damage to that Traco?
Yeah, he called it the big man. And my grandfather on the side over there is Klamath, Modoc, and Mexican, so his English was very terrible. And, he's very traditional. This happened in the 50s, and that's all he called it was the big man.
Yeah, and for anyone who's seen one of those Tracos, those things it's like a tank sitting up on a mountain.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting that sometimes I think the frustration of these creatures gets taken out on pieces of equipment. There's a story here in Washington State where one of those, it was a bulldozer had been pushed off a mountain, and they couldn't figure out what pushed it off the mountain.
Wow.
They found big, huge human-like footprints, and then the bulldozer halfway down the mountain, something had actually pushed it off the mountain. But years later, you became a special agent with the tribal police, which is on law enforcement food chain. That's just about as high up as you can go. Was there any encounters that you were ever called out to, or anything strange that you investigated while you were with the police department?
Yeah, I was with, I got hired onto the Rosebud Indian Reservation, South Central South Dakota. And I started in the early 90s, just out of the military. And I remember in late 1992, an elderly female, she had called and had reports of peeping toms, this and that, and I heard it through the department. Yeah, you're going to get called to this lady's house and say people are peeking in her windows and stuff. Well, she had reported seeing, Bigfoot-like creature like the week before. I remember reading the call, but this particular, I go out there, she said that it was standing, just outside of her porch. And so I roll up there, I don't know how to address these calls, but I know I had, my AR-15 ready. As I come around the corner, I get out and, I had the dispatch make a phone call to her to let me know where this thing is. And I started walking my flashlight. I came around the corner of the little house he was in, and there was bull elk standing there. So I kind of figured maybe that's what was peeking in her windows or this and that. So after I talking to the lady, she says, no, before it's a man who's coming up here peeking in and stealing vegetables out of her garden and just, wrecking things around her house.
Now, did she think that it was a Sasquatch-type creature, or did she actually think it was a man?
First, she thought it was, kids playing around, hitting her trailer, or not her trailer, her house, actually. When she was folding laundry, she told me, like, years before, probably had to been the late 80s, folding laundry, that something was peeking at her at the same height as her, and her house sits above ground, and, I happened to take a look at her window, and it's got to be like 7 feet off the ground, to be at the same height as her in her kitchen. So she knows she saw this, dark figure with eyes looking at her. So I asked her if it was the reflection off the, light onto the window back to her. She said no, and blinked and turned and walked away after I screamed. If you go there today, you can see I think she has the most street lights out in the country I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, she just has the place lit up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And that's pretty common a lot of times when people have the encounters around their property, they'll tend to light the place up. I wanted to ask you, so when the phone calls come in, let's say I make a 911 phone call. Well, I guess it's not really 911 when you're calling the tribal police, but you get what I'm saying. When you're calling for help.
Yeah, we have 911 now. But
yeah, back then they did.
Long number.
Yeah. But, you're calling for help. You want the tribal police to come out. You're asking for help. How do they take it if someone were to call up and say, hey, look, it's not a person. There's a Sasquatch out here. Do they is it the same as, let's say someone makes a phone call from Washington State to the local police and says, hey, there's, I think of and then what I'm getting to is I'm thinking of the 911 call I have at the beginning of the show where the guy calls 911 and he thinks it's a Sasquatch and you can hear it in his voice, but he doesn't want to come.
But he doesn't really say it.
Yeah, he doesn't want to say it.
Yeah, I worked with probably over 12, 13 dispatchers, and I asked them the same thing because when I started getting interested in getting these calls, they just kind of glared, look at you and it says, well, somebody's seen a Bigfoot over here, you know, and they'll say that over the radio. I mean, they ain't shy to say it at all, but it's just who they're going to give the call to, because if they end up chasing the thing, you know, it's going to be quite, I don't know how you say it, pretty exciting, you know. Nobody really wants to go on that call because we don't want to do with it, you know.
Yeah, and I've heard that from other tribal police members I've had on the show where they've gone out to these type of calls. They have seen the creature actually running away from the property, and they don't want to chase the thing down. They just want nothing to do with it. I guess it depends on the beliefs of the tribe and everything. You know, do they think it's something good or bad? Or what other strange calls were you called out to?
Actually, me and another gentleman. He's long gone from the PD. We were coming back from a community called Parmalee, South Dakota, Parmalee, and it was a big gang fight, and there was just only two of us working. And I was in front of him, you know, I had 2 or 3 prisoners, he had 2 prisoners, and, you know, like, you know, the prisoner right behind me said, hey, what is that? And it's early in the morning, you know, sun hasn't really crested yet, but he drives to this ghost talk area. There's a view of the Little White River, and you're kind of sitting above it. And when he said that, I looked over, and I could see something in the water, but I'm trying to concentrate on driving at the same time. I see something in the water, and my partner, he radios to me. He said, did you see that? I said, well, I seen something in the water. He said, well, it was something on 2 feet. That's all he said. And the prisoner said it was a big man that was inside the water crossing the river.
Yeah, that's odd. Weren't you called out to one where a lady had, they said monkeys were on their trailer?
Yeah, that was, he's had them in mid-90s. They just moved a trailer out in this community. It's on the western side of Todd County. Once you pass their place, it's going to be at least 45 minutes before you see, you know, another community. They're on the edge of the timber area, and she had put a trailer out, and she would call the police and say something's messing with the trailer, you know, throwing things at her trailer, shaking her trailer. And this particular call that I went on said her and her companion said that there was actual monkeys on top of her trailer. And, you know, in South Dakota, we do not have any monkeys as far as I know. And she said they were small, hairy men. And, you know, in Lakota language, we do have a myth of what we call Wawilas, which are very small people. But the way she described them, they were just like chimpanzees. And from that night, a particular night when I was there, she said, yeah, they ran off towards the car. Her companion had grabbed the gun, shot it in the air. They took off, and then they noticed a bigger one, probably like 6-7 foot one that was standing near a tree, take off and was whooping at them. I was like, you know, like I was saying, whooping at them. What does that mean? She said, no, they're going whoop, whoop. And they were like, you know, talking to each other as they ran off. After a few times, they would just shoot in the air when they leave, or sometimes they would just leave and never come back till morning. And they found, you know, most of their stuff messed with, you know, pushed over. So a medicine man had told her, just put out food for them and they won't bother you. So they started putting food out because there is, as our traditional people say, there's spirits out there. You must feed them. If you're going to eat, you feed them too, the same, and they won't bother you. So as far as I know, she's never got a call like that. You know, never had any incidents after that, as far as I know.
So this wasn't a one-time incident. This was going on for a while?
For a long time. She said about 8 months. And she just moved her trailer in there. So I don't know if it was taken over on their territory, or I you know, couldn't really explain that.
Let me ask you, have you ever gone out to a call where someone says there's a Sasquatch or there's, you know, a Sasquatch-type creature out there? Have you ever gone out to a call where you've looked around, you found something that made you stop and go, okay, there's something going on out here? Like footprints, or have you ever found anything odd that you just couldn't explain?
The only other one is the call when I became a special agent in 2011. And I was pretty much in charge of the criminal investigation of any major crime that happened on the reservation. And I was called to a fatality accident on we call it the Grass Mountain Road. The patrol officer was on scene, and I was doing my investigation. The ambulance people requested, they were kind of hungry, and the gas station wasn't 10 miles away, so I let them go. So it was just me and him down there when I was taking my measurements, pictures, doing my investigation. We were sitting there comparing notes of what time he got the call. While I was interviewing him, we heard these screams out, had them in the west of the river, and they were pretty loud. The only thing I can compare it to is a YouTube video that I watched from California where these guys were along the road, and almost sound not really like the Joker, but kind of a whooping scream. We both heard that, and he begged for me, because when I was done with my investigation, I was going to leave, and he'd be the only one down there. And he begged me to stay with him.
Yeah, I know from our conversation yesterday, you were talking about the, what's that one called? Out at the Blue Mountains, where it sounds like a hyena laughing. That's what.
Yes.
That's what you heard.
That's what I heard. Yeah. Both of us. You could play that in front of him, and he will say, "Yeah, that's what we heard. Exactly what we heard."
Is there a lot of green area out there in South Dakota?
Oh yeah, there's half of our reservation is covered in canyons. Deep canyons. They're just like mountains, but it's inverted downward. There's a lot of creek beds, a lot of places, a lot of trees where, they'll go from flats to nothing but trees in an instant.
Investigating all of this, is that really what made you draw your interest into this? Coming out to these phone calls, going out, having these different experiences, is that really what made you have an interest in this?
Yeah, it spiked my interest because, a couple of other officers went on calls where they had this, and I believe one officer chased it. There was a police chief in Pine Ridge Reservation who actually, we've been in contact, we've known each other for years, and he was actually on Finding Bigfoot with his story, and I got to talk to him about when he had it on infrared camera. But it really spiked my interest, and so I started the Bigfoot South Dakota Facebook webpage, and pretty much I share and starting to get to know a lot more people out here in South Dakota, and learning all the sightings that happen here in South Dakota, like the ones in 79 and Little Eagle, with all the news reports from CBS and covering themselves, trying to actually follow up on that this past summer. But it really spiked my interest so much that people are starting to come forward with different stories, and I got quite a few of them so far that I'm working on.
What happened with your officer friend? What was that encounter? I don't think I remember that one.
He was actually called out to a house between Parmalee, the community of Parmalee and Mission, and he was called out to a house that somebody was trying to break in their cars, and when he gets out there, and this was like an evening time, just at dusk, there was a fire that was probably 7-8 miles west of there, just a small fire. And when he pulled up to the residence, something had taken off, so he started chasing it in a vehicle, because it's pretty much a flat, little rolling hills. But when he got to the tree line, he couldn't find anything, but all he could see was a big dark figure. So he figured it was just a, neighborhood kid that was breaking in cars, but he said it was a pretty big kid, but it was a lot faster than his, what he was driving, because he had a 4-wheel drive.
Oh, wow. So he was actually chasing it down in the car. He wasn't on foot.
Yeah, he was on a 4-wheel drive vehicle, and they were probably about maybe a quarter of a mile from the actual, when the canyons drop off into the timber reserve. He saw it running, taking off, and so he tried to, do the V line for it. As soon as it hit the tree line, it was gone.
Yeah, if you can't catch it in the car, it's probably not a kid.
Yeah. He said it was probably about good, maybe 400, 500 yards from him when he started pulling up to the residence. And it took off running, and that's how it got his attention. So he went past the house and straight for it. And as soon as they hit the tree line, it was gone. And it was, all he said, it was all in black.
Do you guys have dogmen out there in South Dakota?
The only thing that, not in South Dakota, before I retired as a police officer or special agent, I've taken a small job out in Winnebago, in Iowa. Actually, it's the Winnebago tribe. One of the guards had gave me a story that happened the night before, and we had to supervise like 15 security guards for this casino, and you were plainclothes cop, and he told me a story that happened the night before, and he got on the internet and showed me this picture of a werewolf-looking thing, because he almost ran into it on the Winnebago Reservation in Nebraska, and he said it pretty much stood up on two legs and looked at him, and he was so freaked out about it that, he asked me, he said, "You got any guns I can borrow? Because it's close to my house." And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know about that."
Yeah, I'm starting to get more and more of those type of reports, and I'm not really sure what to make of it. But I mean, I believe the people that are sending it to me, but I'm getting more and more of those reports. And it's harder to get that out of people than just your normal Bigfoot report. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Now, you sent me a video. I posted it up to the blog on SasquatchChronicles.com. I thought it was a great video. It was of the guy that was, the thing came up on the porch. And
yeah, he heard the footsteps, and that's what woke him up, and it started grunting. So by the time he got his phone and he didn't even look outside. He just put his hand up there above the window, just held it because he could hear it. That happened in December this past year, and he held on for a long time because he's been having little activity off and on at his house. When he recorded that, he was, really freaked out about it. And finally, in June of this year, he actually sent me that, asked me to look at it, and went onto his property, and pretty much the front of his whole property is nothing but thick creek bed that runs from, east to west. And he had a lot of activity as far as, his central air system. Big things are really heavy. He said that was pushed over twice. Things been thrown at his house, tapping on his house, and stuff like that. He doesn't have no idea what it could be. He just thought it was like, animals coming up and rubbing up against the wall and stuff until he heard that. And he's been freaked out ever since.
Did this take place in South Dakota?
Yeah, it was on the Rosebud Reservation, yes.
And do you guys have bears out there?
No, we do not. I think the last bear recording, we do here in Rapid City, have Bear Country USA, but they keep good count on those bears there. But I think the last grizzly that's ever been here was in the late 80s, and it was actually a black bear. But as far as when, kind of ironic, Custer's killed one of the last grizzly bears that were known to this area. But we do not have any bear, no black bear. That noise on there, I can't figure that out. I've heard bulls, I've heard all kinds of animals making those type of noises, but that's not the noise what I hear.
Yeah, and again, for the listeners out there, if you go to SasquatchChronicles.com, it's under something at my window. I posted it on Friday, so if you get a chance, check it out. But, I mean, you're right, Chris. I listened to that, and I have had other people listen to it, and some people said, well, maybe it's a bear, but it doesn't really sound like a bear. And I'm like, well, this took place in South Dakota, and a lot of people are kind of scratching their heads when they listen to that. Has he seen the creatures out on his property?
No, he has not. He's never really paid attention. He doesn't really, and he was a former cop back in the late 90s, and he's flabbergasted on what the heck this thing is. I don't think he even stays home anymore, or when he does, he makes sure it's daylight, never comes out. So he's got a shotgun by every door and window, so, he lives out there by himself. And I think I sent you a picture of that property there, it's surrounded.
He really is out in the middle of nowhere. On his property, so he's been getting rocks thrown at the house, he's been getting things brushing up against the house. I would imagine tapping. I mean, there's not too many animals that do that.
Yeah, exactly. And just off that report, in June this year, I got another report, or actually it was in July. Got a report of a kid, and it's within this, has to be in this 20 square mile area. Was driving a tractor from a community to a farmhouse, and he was actually on the highway, and this sighting took place, 1:00 in the afternoon. He was driving the tractor, and he happened to look over, down in the ditch. You sit in the tractor, they're pretty high up, and he noticed something black in the lilac bushes. And when he started to look even closer, he slowed down to a stop. The thing stood up and took off on 2 feet, and it was totally black. And he'd called his father. His father got in touch with me, and they actually went out there that evening when he got done with his chores. And there's a picture on Bigfoot, South Dakota, of him standing in the bushes. And this gentleman, he's 6'3", 6'4", somewhere around there. He's a pretty tall gentleman, but he's holding his hand up as far as, how big that creature was. And those bushes come up to actually the gentleman's chest area. And so that thing had to be, fairly like 8 feet, 8.5 feet tall.
Yeah, I was going to say probably 8 feet, 8 feet plus at least. Was he able to give you a description of what it was, or was it just that it was black?
Yeah, no, it was, it had a face on it, really thin lips. Had, the facial area was clear like a human. He could see the lips, and it didn't really do anything, but the hair was real short, like shiny type, just coal jet black.
What does the local tribe think of these creatures?
They think of them as, they're pretty sacred. Actually, they think they're part of the earth. They're earth protectors. And when I was talking about that bulldozer story, my mom, she just suggested that, they protect the earth. That's probably why he's damaging the equipment that's for the logging. So that's their perspective on it. And as far as, one of the witnesses I talked to a couple days ago, he had mentioned one thing, that he saw a creature out of this guy's house and told his elder. And his elder says, "Don't bother him. He won't bother you." He said, they've been living here forever. He said, they're just protectors of, the land and stuff. And I'm like, well, that thing was watching you,
Yeah. What's your take on these creatures? What do you think? What do you think they are?
I've never seen one. I've heard growls. I've, seen video, and I'm really skeptical. And that's probably why my interest is so high on this subject that, I definitely don't want to have an encounter like you had. And that kind of terrifies me. Makes me want to grab a bunch of miniguns and go out there looking, but I'm just very skeptical. And, if it is out there, it'd be like, try to protect it.
Now, on the tribe there in South Dakota, I would imagine that do they openly talk about it?
When somebody sees it in the community, it's pretty much what we call as a moccasin telegraph. Everybody knows. They openly do talk about it, because they really protect their children, and they hear stories that they steal kids and this and that. So when something like that is seen, probably every kid is known to stay close to home or stay away from this area, that.
Yeah, see, that's where I kind of get lost with some Native Americans. I'm pretty heavily Native American myself, as far as my family. And what's interesting is, depending on the tribe you talk to, is their outlook on the creature. And every one of them has a different outlook on the creature. But what's interesting is I've heard that too. They're protectors of the earth. They're protectors of the forest. They're guardians. But in the same breath, if they come around, keep your women and your children close. And it kind of throws you off a little bit. You're like, well, wait a minute. I thought this thing was a guardian. I thought this thing was a protector.
And all the research, of them hurting people and stuff like that. I mean, if that is going on, that's one thing. I definitely don't want to encounter that, but it's just really like a two-sided coin. You don't know if they're good or evil. We don't know until we actually find one.
Well, and I think it goes back to my view on it with a wild animal. Sometimes you see, I have no fear of black bears at all, because every time I've encountered a black bear, it's ran. I mean, it's turned and it's gone. But, sometimes you do get those encounters with black bears where they don't turn and they don't run, and people have been attacked by them. It's very unpredictable. And I think with these creatures, they can be very unpredictable, in their behavior and how they react to certain situations.
Yeah.
Well, was there any other stories or anything else you wanted to share?
Yeah. actually working. I know earlier this year, June 30th, a game warden was out cruising, and this happened this year. He was driving on the same road where where this video was taken. It's 5 miles down the road. Actually going in on they call it the Ring Thunder Road, but it's the cut across that goes into Millette County. Down that creek, 5 miles from there is when it crossed in front of him. And he knows what he saw. He had 2 passengers with him. And the black thing came across the road, and it was moonlight out. It happened to be about probably 12:30 at night. And he was, as he's driving by, he slows down. There's moonlight out, and you can see the figure, the outline of the figure. And he said it was a man. He knew exactly what it was, just kept driving. On that same road, I talked to a gentleman last night, one of my lifelong friends, happened to run into him last night, and I told him what I was doing. I haven't seen him in a while, and he told me a story that kind of, was like, whoa, this happened on that same road. Happened probably 5 years ago, he said. They were out, him and his buddies were having a good time. They were driving slowly, just cruising from, there's a back road from Pomeroy, South Dakota to White River, South Dakota. And it's that same exact road. They were cruising, they came over this hill, and they saw a black thing that was hunched over in the middle of the road, like it was messing with its feet or messing with something on the road. When they got closer, within about 50 yards, it sprung up, it did like a forward somersault, and sprung up and jumped over the fence. And he described it as, jet black, shiny, orange eyes. As they passed, they was looking right at him, had orange eyes. He said it was about 9 feet tall. And he said he couldn't believe how big that thing was, agile. He thought it was a cow on the road. The 3 guys, the 3 gentlemen in a pickup, they both all looked at each other and said, "Oh, what did you see? What did you see?" Questioning there, because they've been having a good time. And I said, "No, I saw a big hairy man. I saw what I saw." And him describing how they just rolled into a forward somersault and just, hopped over the fence just in one leap, from the ditch. It had to be pretty big and agile.
These things are really agile. Now you're talking about the video. Are you talking about the guy that recorded the thing growling at his window?
Yeah. No, this ain't the same guy. This is a totally different guy.
Right, right.
Same road.
Yeah.
Same road.
About 5 miles from his house, huh?
Yep.
Wow.
And speaking of that, I come to learn, I'm still researching. I haven't found the police officer that took his report, but it was a Millette County, South Dakota. It was one of the sheriff's deputies that a truck driver had ran into what he described as a big, hairy, something on 2 feet had hit the truck. The truck hit it and went off in a ditch, and so the truck driver waited a long time for it. And I'm still researching. I don't know all the details, but as soon as I find a report or talk to the actual deputies, I could let you further know about that.
Yeah, if you would, I'd love to have you back on for an update on that. It'd be nice to. I get those occasionally, from truck drivers that say, well, I hit something big and hairy and I was running on 2 legs. But most of the time when they hit them, which is kind of amazing, they generally don't go down. I mean, they'll go down, but then they'll get back up and run.
My understanding from the gentleman that told me this is that they searched the ditch. They searched within, 200 yards from where you hit that. Didn't find nothing. They did find hair in the grill. It was black horse hair, or cinnamon brown, I could say.
Have you actually talked to the game warden that had a sighting?
Yeah, I did.
And is he pretty?
He's pretty adamant. He's pretty traditional, and it's really hard for him to talk about it, but he knows I'm very interested in, and he's been a lifelong friend. When he told me a different story, that when he was actually on patrol, when the sunset rule, they go to this place, and it's called Iron Shell Flats, and he was sitting there scoping, and as the game wardens call it, the last shot. When that time limit comes, anything after that time limit, it's basically poaching. So he usually waits for that, and he didn't really hear anything, so he starts driving along this trail on this flat, and he notices something big and black, probably about 400 yards away, walking. So he figured it's some Indian camel that's going back to their truck, or you know. So he starts driving towards it. When he starts getting closer and closer, it looks at him and takes off running so fast. But he's close enough where he could, you know, I think within 70 yards or so, that he knows it's a very gigantic man. We do have one hunter out there, one of my good friends, and he's 6'6", 6'7", very large. And he said he could dwarf him no problem. When he told me that, he said he was freaked out and just went through a fence and didn't stop. He didn't want to ever go back out there for a while. But it's his duty, so he has to go back there, but he just goes out with more ammo.
Yeah, I don't blame him. Did he ever get a good look at the face, or was he able to give you any sort of...
No, it was, you know, dusk. You know, you just see him as a gigantic figure, all in black, total black. Like if somebody dressed up for turkey hunting, all camo, and, you know, at the dusk, it looks like something that's dressed in black. But he said it was, the way it took off running, I said there's no man that could do that, you know, long strides and disappear like that.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. By the speed of that thing, he probably realized it wasn't a man at that point.
Yeah.
I didn't realize there was so much going on in South Dakota. I don't get a lot of reports from South Dakota. I would imagine, though, that there would be.
These happen over the years, you know. Like one, I talked to a firefighter back in July of 2012. There was actually a group of firefighters that were inside of a van, and they were waiting to get deployed, and they were actually in the staging area in western Todd County, basically probably 5 miles from where that trailer house was, you know, just right across the road. And they were all sitting there. It was probably 3 o'clock in the morning or so, and something had pushed the top of the van, pushed it down and shook the van so much. They had no clue what it was because half of them were asleep, you know, they're just getting ready to get deployed. And they didn't know, they didn't see anything. They saw, you know, the place had previously burned. And when you walk on burned grass, you can see footprints. And if you're wearing a boot, you know, it'll be the same size as a gigantic footprint. But the interesting part about that is that they had handprints that were, I think one of them described it as like 11 inches long on top of the van, on the dust. And somebody has pictures, but it's still real hard to track that down.
Yeah, you're getting some good reports out there.
Yeah. Well, they're starting to come out more and more, and you know, I'm very thankful for that. You know, I do everything funded by myself, so somebody calls me, if I'm near it, I will go, definitely. Look for tracks, look for any sign, and sit out there and listen.
And Chris, if someone's in South Dakota and they have a sighting, how would they contact you?
Actually, I believe my number is on the Bigfoot South Dakota Facebook webpage. A lot of people, they know me for years. You know, I was being an investigator, and, you know, especially at home, they know how to get a hold of me, no problem. But if they, you know, I check my page hourly, but if it's like an overnight sighting, usually they just message me and let me know, and they usually show up on the area.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I was talking to Brenda Harris, and she's out in New Mexico, I believe. And she, you know, they have different sightings on the reservation out there. And one of the things that, I don't know if you've ever looked into this or not, Chris, but one of the things that's interesting, she was telling me one time that these kids had shot one of these creatures, and they had killed it, and they took pictures of it. They were later warned. It was the federal government stepped in and squashed the whole thing. But she was there talking to the kids. She was there. She saw the pictures. The tribal elders were upset because these kids had shot this thing. And it was kind of a shame the way they shot it. They just were just out shooting just to be shooting. But they had shot this thing. She was saying the federal government showed up and basically squashed the whole thing, took the pictures, told the kids to shut their mouth, told everyone involved that it didn't happen. And it was just, I'll have to put you in contact with Brenda. It's a real interesting encounter when I talked with her about it because, and she said it was federal. It was definitely federal agents that came out. It wasn't your local sheriff department. It wasn't your local police department.
Yeah, I did ask, because we work closely with the FBI, ATF, because they have offices in Superior, Aberdeen, and Rapid City, and a lot of my friends, and I've always asked them, they said, what would you do? You know, these are city kids that are coming work on the reservation. What would happen if somebody brings in a Bigfoot and they just look at me and like, shit, I don't want nothing to do with that, you know, basically that attitude, you know. And I've always asked them, well, if somebody shot one, I said, well, we've got to investigate it. And I don't know if it's a different agency, but we work closely with the FBI.
Yeah, I think that, I've talked about it in the past, and I definitely think there's an agency out there that,
yeah, it has to be.
Yeah, it takes.
And I've listened to most of the shows with the Men in Black, stuff like that. And people do tell me there's, you know, there's possibly an agency out there, could be a contract agency or something, but, you know, I've never dealt with them and hopefully never have to if I come in contact with one of these things. You know, they can have none of me.
No, absolutely. Well, and if you want to contact Chris Barrera, it's Bigfoot South Dakota on Facebook. You can get a hold of him. And Chris, keep me updated with anything else that you find. I'd love to have you back on the show for an update. And I can't thank you enough for coming on.
No problem. And anything that comes up, we'll definitely be in touch. And thanks for having me on. It's an honor.
The honor was definitely mine, Chris. And I want to thank the audience for joining us tonight. I will be in San Diego next week. I'll be checking out a couple areas. And hopefully I can film a lot of that stuff and post it up to the website, SasquatchChronicles.com. Again, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, email me. My email address is wes@SasquatchChronicles.com. Until next time, everyone, have a great night.